If the statistics are right, the Jew constitutes but 1% of the human race. It suggests a nebulous dim puff of stardust, lost in the blaze of the Milky Way. Properly, the Jew ought hardly to be heard of, but he is heard of. He has always been heard of. He is as prominent on the planet as any other people, and his commercial importance is extravagantly out of proportion to the smallness of his bulk. His contributions to the world's list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine, and abstruse learning are also way out of proportion to the weakness of his numbers. He has made a marvelous fight in the world, in all the ages, and has done it with his hands tied behind him. He could be vain of himself and be excused for it. The Egyptian, the Babylonian, and the Persian rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, and then faded to dream stuff and passed away. The Greek and the Roman followed and made a vast noise, and they, too, are gone. Other peoples have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out, and they sit in twilight now, or have vanished. The Jew saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert and aggressive mind. All things are mortal but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? I don't know to what degree any or some of you may be familiar with this passage, but if you're not familiar with it, you may be quite surprised to find out who wrote it. This was written in 1898 by Mark Twain. He wrote a long essay called Concerning the Jews, and this is the conclusion of the essay. This is the ending. And as always, he wrote beautifully and eloquently and asked a very good question. What is the secret of the immortality of the Jew? But he asked a question and he left it at that because he didn't have the answer. But we do have the answer. We know. We have the information that we need, and we maybe need to flesh it out a little and discuss it and get into it into detail, but we have the information we need. We know the answer. Why is it that the Jew collectively is immortal? We shouldn't be here. By any account, by any statistical estimate, there's no way that anyone would ever have predicted that we would still be here 2,000 years ago. 200 years ago, no one would have guessed we'd be here today, but we are. And the reason that we're still here, and the reason that we're always going to be here, is because we need to be here by definition. As long as the universe exists, we need to be here. It's just the way it is. By default and by definition, the existence of the universe requires, the purpose of the universe requires that we should be here. I'm going to ask for a show of hands. Who believes that angels exist? Okay. So not everybody's hand is up. I'm going to suggest, perhaps to your surprise, that you could respond correctly that angels don't exist, depending on what you mean. It depends on what we mean by exist. Angels are real. Angels are as real as we are. But when we say that something exists, if what we mean is that it exists physically, that it's a part of this world, it's tangible, it's made out of physical matter, it's made out of physical energy, angels, if that's how we define existence, then angels actually don't exist. Angels are not physical entities. They're equally real as that which is physical, but if, when we say existence, we mean that which exists physically, angels actually don't exist. Because the Creator, God, created and continues to create a world of matter, a physical reality that we live in, that we experience, that we touch, hear, see, taste, smell. And the Creator also created and continues to create realities that are equally as real, but they exist on a completely different plane. They're not on the same graph. Angels are real, but physically, they don't exist. So God created that which is physical, the physical world that we know, that we can experience and interact with our senses, with our bodies. And God created spirituality. God created this entire infinite collection of realities that don't physically exist, that we can't sense, we can't interact with. And the question is why? Why does the universe exist? Why are we here? Why does the Milky Way exist? Why do time and space exist? If we accept that God is true and that God created the universe from scratch, and that God created that which is physical, and God created angels, and God created time, and God created space, there has to be a reason. God wouldn't have spent the energy to create all of these things if he didn't have a valid reason to do it. He would have just sat there by himself like he was doing before he bothered to do all of those things. There has to have been a very important reason that justified him putting in the effort to do all of that. If we want to look at what's the reason, what's the purpose, what was God's motivation for bothering to create time and space and to then create a universe, to create spiritual universes, to create a physical universe, to create everything that's in the universe, the galaxies, the stars, the planets, all the things that are on just planet Earth, the animals, the plants, the minerals, the people, us. Why did God bother with all of this? There has to have been a good reason. Otherwise, it was the biggest mistake that's ever been made. God doesn't make mistakes. If you want to look at what someone's motivation is, if you want to figure out what someone wants, look at what they're doing and look at when they stop. There's an expression we say in prayers in davening on Friday night. Soif ma'aseh b'machshava tchila. Soif ma'aseh, the end of one's actions, b'machshava tchila, are in the beginning of one's thoughts. There's an expression people say, you always find something. Where do you always find something? You always find it in the last place that you look. Well, did anybody ever keep looking after they found what they were looking for? Right? When you find what you're looking for, you stop looking. That's the real reason you always find something in the last place that you look. Because when you find it, you stop looking. Because no one wakes up in the morning and says, oh, I feel like looking for something. What should I look for? Oh, okay, I found it. Now I'm going to keep looking even though I found it, because all I wanted to do was look for it anyway. There's something that you want, something that you need. In order to get it, you have to look for it if you don't know where it is. So you look, and when you find it, you stop. So when someone's looking, you don't have to ask what someone's looking for. If you observe someone and you watch them looking, and they're looking here, they're opening drawers, turning things over, taking books off shelves, you're wondering, what's this person looking for? If you observe for long enough, you see them pick something up and they stop looking, you know that's the thing that they were looking for. That's the reason they were turning the house over, was to find that thing. You don't have to ask. If you look at when a person stops, you'll know what was the objective. You'll know what they were looking for all along. Soif ma'aseh, the last thing that a person does, the last action, was the first thing that the person thought of. I want this object. That's the thing that I think of first. If I don't know where it is, I have to figure out what am I going to do to find it. I need to look, I need to search, I need to pick things up, I need to open drawers, I need to move things around and try to find it. So the first thought is, machshava tchila, what's the thing at the beginning of my thought? What's the first thing I think of? I think of the objective. I wake up in the morning, I want to experience the sensation of eating ice cream. Then I think to myself, okay, I want to experience the sensation of eating ice cream. What am I going to do about it? I need to have ice cream and I need to eat it in order to experience that sensation. Okay, so what do I need to do to get there? I need to be in the ice cream store, which means I need to go to the ice cream store, which means I have to get up off the couch and I have to have money to pay for it, which means I need to get a job. So what do? exact opposite order. I get a job, I have money, I get up off the couch, I go to the store, I buy the ice cream, I eat it, and I experience the sensation. So by definition, because the way things work is that we think about what do we want, then we figure out the process of getting it, the order in which we think is objective, and then the process backwards. The order in which we execute is exactly the opposite. By definition, that's always the way it works. We start from the beginning of the process, we get to the end of the process, we reach the objective. If you want to know what someone's objective is, watch their actions, look at where they stop. When they stop, you know that was the objective. And sometimes we don't even realize what our objective is. Sometimes in life, especially with existential things, we're looking and we're searching and there's something that we want and we look for it and we look for it and finally we find it. And you know what? We continue looking for something else. What does that tell us? That tells us that what we were really looking for wasn't what we thought we were looking for. Because if it was, we would have stopped. The fact that we kept on looking means that what we really wanted was something different, which is why we're still looking for it. So now let's look back at the process of creation. Sof ma'aseh, the last thing a person does is the first thing they thought about. Machshava tchila, you think about the objective, and the objective is where you end the process. God created spiritual worlds. God created angels. God created what's called Seder Hishtalshelus, this spiritual evolutionary process by means of which there are layers and layers and infinite layers of spiritual realities as existence makes its way down and gets to the point where there's this tangible material world that we live in. This is the last step in the process. There's nothing more material than the physical world that we experience. This is the bottom of the chain. There's a process of evolution from God at the top, then layers and layers of reality as they become less and less in touch with the full truth and more tangible until we get down here, which is the physical world that we experience. If this is where the process stopped, there's no further reality. There are no more layers of existence that God continued to create after this. Which means that this is the objective by definition. Sof ma'aseh, the last thing that a person does, the place where they stop the process, is by definition what the objective was. If God was interested in angels, if that's what he wanted, if angels were God's objective, God's ultimate interest, he'd have created the angels and stopped. Because you find something in the last place you look, because when you find it, you stop looking. God didn't stop with the angels. God kept on going. And more layers, and more layers, and more layers, and more layers, until he got to this material, tangible, non-spiritual, non-godly world. And as counterintuitive as it seems, that tells us by definition that this is what it was all about. The angels are there because of us and the world that we experience. All the layers of spirituality, all the spiritual realities that exist in between us and God, all of them are secondary to us and our experience. Because once God was done creating them, he kept on going until he got here. Once he got here, he didn't keep going anymore. Because this, our life, our world, our experience is the ultimate objective. God found what he was looking for, and he stopped looking. He finally created the ultimate objective, the thing that he was working towards all along. And then once he got there, he stopped the process. So our world, our experience in this very material, mundane, non-godly world is actually the objective of the angels and the spiritual realities and layers of divinity and everything that exists between us and God. All of that is there to serve the purpose of our experience in this tangible, material, and non-godly world. And that has to be by definition. So what's the point of it all? Why is the universe here? There are a number, if you look in a variety of Kabbalistic texts, there are different purposes that are described. The purpose of creation, God created everything because of this reason, because of that reason. And there are a number of reasons, and there's a lot of discussion about the variety of reasons, but the reason that the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, the first Chabad Rebbe, chooses to focus on in Tanya is because it says, Nis'ave HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, had a desire, Lios lo dira b'tachtonim, to have a dwelling place, a divine home for the Creator in this physical material world. So God woke up one day, so to speak, and said, you know what? You know what would be the ultimate novelty? Spirituality isn't novel. Spirituality is relatively natural. If you think about it from God's perspective, spirituality is closer to God than the material world is. So it's more natural for it to exist. If the beginning point is God, the closer something is to God and the more it resembles God, the more natural it is for it to be there. So for spirituality to exist isn't novel. It's relatively natural. For this world to exist is a little bit more novel. But you know what would be super novel? To marry the two together. Angels don't physically exist. It should be, and it is, a technical impossibility to take something that exists in one reality, take something that doesn't exist within that reality, and join them together. That would be novel, and that would be super cool and exciting. But how are we supposed to do that if it's an impossibility? If you have people who speak two different languages, you have, let's say, here in Florida, and someone is in court for whatever reason, and the judge speaks English, the judge understands English, the jury understands and speaks English, and the person who's standing in front of the court speaks Mandarin and doesn't understand or speak a word of English. So what do? You have an interpreter. You have a translator. I missed that. You get someone to come and stand up in court, someone who can understand English and speak Mandarin, someone who can understand Mandarin and speak English, the same person who can understand and speak both languages, and this person now, as someone who can interact with and communicate in both languages, can facilitate communication between the court and this individual. So now what we need to do is figure out, what God needed to do, is to figure out how to get the translator, how to come up with some sort of entity that could achieve the impossible, that could connect matter, tangible material world that we know very well, together with that which doesn't physically exist, with spirituality, with divinity. It's not physical. And as far as physical matter is concerned, it doesn't exist. How is that going to happen? There's a blessing that we say, a blessing that's said, it's said as part of morning blessings, and it's also said after a person uses the restroom. The blessing is known as Asher Yotzar, which means he who is formed, and we thank God for forming us and for taking care of everything that happens in the body so we can stay healthy, etc. And at the conclusion of this blessing, we say, Baruch atah Hashem, blessed are you God, Roifei chol basar, who heals all flesh, umafli la'asos, and does wonders. What wonders? Well, the most immediate thing that comes to mind, and what it means literally and what it's addressing most immediately, is what's happening in our bodies. If we take a minute to think about what it takes for us to be alive, for us to exist. We're made out of, I don't know how many trillions of cells of different types, different tissue types. Every one of those cells is a complete factory with tens of thousands of things happening at any given moment in time, all in perfect balance. Every single chemical reaction happening within a cell has to be in perfect balance with every other one. Otherwise, disaster is the outcome. So it's not a wonder when someone's unwell, God forbid, when someone's not feeling well. That's not a surprise. The wonder is, how is it possible? How is it even fathomable for any organism, particularly a human, to be alive for even a second? The complexity and the perfection that's necessary is unfathomable. And so we thank God for our health, and we say, Mafli Lasso, who does wonders. Thank God who does wonders. But there's another layer to this. There's another layer of wonders that God is responsible for in our experience, and we're blessing and thanking God for that too. And that is that inside of each of us, every single one of us is a technical impossibility. Every single one of us is a body and a soul. The body, if it didn't have a soul, would effectively be human steak. And the soul without the body would resemble angels to a degree. It would look similar to angels. It would just be this spiritual entity. It wouldn't be a person. A body's not a person, and a soul's not a person. A person is, by definition, a combination, a partnership between a body and a soul. That partnership should not be possible. And God makes it happen, and God puts in effort at every moment in time to allow that partnership to continue, even though it shouldn't. And when we thank God for our health, we thank God, Umafli Lasos, who does wonders, and who pairs a little piece of himself, a little piece of divinity, which is who we are deep down inside, and combines it together with a physical body. They shouldn't be able to interact with each other or relate to each other even. And God goes out of his way to make sure that we can. And once that happens, once Mafli Lasos, once God enacts this wonder of bringing the body and the soul together, now God has his translator. Now every single one of us has a body that can interact with the world. We also have a little piece of God within us. We have a soul. We are divine inside. Which means that we are able to be the translator. We can facilitate the interaction and the communication between divinity, between godliness and physical matter and the world around us, even though it shouldn't be possible. The reason that the universe exists is in order for it to be uplifted and to be filled with divinity, to be filled with godliness. There isn't an object, a place, an entity, a concept, an idea, an individual, anything that isn't here in order to serve that purpose, to play a role in allowing the union and the marriage of matter and spirit. It's just like body and soul, but at a global level, at the level of the entire universe. Everything that exists is here to contribute towards that. So now, we're a good part of the way towards understanding the answer to Mark Twain's question. Mark Twain asks, all things are mortal but the Jew. What is the secret of his immortality? The secret of our immortality is that we are at the front edge of this objective. Every entity, every person that exists has a role to play. But just very briefly, and to summarize it very generally, someone who's not Jewish, for example, has 7 mitzvahs. Someone who's Jewish has 613. It's a little bit more of a responsibility, in case you haven't noticed. And those 613 mitzvahs translate into thousands and thousands of halachas, of rules. If you look at a set of Shulchan Aruch, of a code of Jewish law, on a shelf, it looks like this. And they're big books. So we, at the front line of carrying out this objective of fulfilling this purpose, need to exist, because the reason that the universe exists, the reason that the galaxy exists, the reason time and space exist is in order to allow divinity to become one with a physical world, which shouldn't be possible. And we are the ones who can make that happen. So we need to be here by definition. If that's the reason that the world exists, that means by definition we need to be here, because the purpose of existence, the purpose of time, the purpose of space, the purpose of everything that exists, the purpose of matter, the purpose of energy, all of it depends on us. So we have to be here. If we God forbid, ceased to be here, hypothetically, which is not possible, the whole purpose of existence would fall apart. And then the universe wouldn't need to exist. So as long as the universe is here, as long as time and space exist, we need to continue existing. And that's the way it's always going to be. Now, practically speaking, if you want to get things done, and you want to get a lot done, and you want to get so much done that it's too much for one person to physically handle, for one person to be able to do on their own, what do? You delegate. You get someone to do things for you. And there are lots of different varieties of delegating. But one thing that they all have in common is you have to give clear instructions. Today, there's a form of delegating where people delegate jobs to people that they don't know and they've never met and they're never going to meet. It could be someone on a different continent who barely speaks your language, but technology today allows that you can delegate work to someone in a different continent and never see them, and you send them a list of things to do when you go to bed at night, and you wake up in the morning and they're done. And you can have a dozen or 100 of them and you delegate work to all of them. But what do you have to do first if you want it to work? You need to give them very clear instructions. If you delegate work to people and you don't give them instructions, you are in for a very, very unpleasant, unexpected outcome. If you want someone to get something done for you, you need to tell them exactly what your objective is. You need to tell them how to get there. You need to tell them how you want them to go about reaching your objective, what you want them to do. When you see this, do A. When you see that, do B, etc. And the more clearly you delegate, the better your outcome will be. It's very simple. The quality of the outcome is proportional to how much effort you put into delegating. And that's why God, the Creator, put a lot of attention to detail in delegating. Torah is the user manual. It's the instructions that God distributes to all of his employees, all the people to whom God has delegated a piece of the purpose of existence, have a set of instructions. You can't delegate effectively without instructions. Now, keeping this in mind, and this was the overall theme of the talk, what does Torah want in 2019? What does Torah think of 2019? What does Torah think of 2020? 2030, 2050. The world has changed. The world is unrecognizable. Forget when Torah was given thousands of years ago. The world is unrecognizable from the way it was 100 years ago for sure. Even 10 years ago, let alone 20, 30, but 100 years ago, the world is completely unrecognizable. You go back to before the Industrial Revolution, you go back to when Torah was given on Mount Sinai, it's beyond unrecognizable. Someone who was alive then, who woke up now, would literally actually probably think that they woke up on a different planet. So how is it that the same Torah is talking to us today? How do we have the same Torah that they had then when they didn't, when their life had such minimal resemblance to our lives today? Once we understand what Torah is, not just the information in Torah, but the identity of Torah and the function of Torah, which is to give us the instructions that we need to be proper workers on behalf of the Creator and to do what the Creator delegates to us, Torah tells us how to do that. Torah's objective doesn't change. Torah's objective is to unite divinity and the material world. And the instructions and the guidelines haven't changed. The details evolve, for sure, which is why there's a lot of discussion in halachic texts. For example, as technology evolves, there's a lot of discussion about how things work and what you can do and what you can't do and how you can do it and how you can't do it, etc., etc. So the details and the ramifications evolve, but the purpose is the same, and the fundamental rules are the same. If you delegate work to people overseas using an online company, If you have people that you've really built up a solid foundation of delegating, teaching them, explaining to them about your objectives and what you want and the pathway to get there and the rules and the approach and your philosophy, etc., as the landscape changes, you'll have to tweak things. But because they understand the foundations and your philosophy and your objective and your overall approach, they'll be able to stay on track. They'll need updates. They'll need a tweak here. They'll need another detail over there. But all of that is secondary to the objective and to the purpose and to your general approach and philosophy. That doesn't change. And so what Torah thinks of 2019, what Torah thinks of 2020, of 2050, is exactly the same thing as it thought of day number one. And that is that we are here to bring divinity, to bring God into every single part of the world, into every object, into every person, into every point in space, into every point in time, into every concept, into every idea. Every encounter, every experience that we have is an opportunity to bring divinity into the world, to change the world, to completely change the character of the world, of time and of space, and of all existence. And what Torah wants us to do is to continue doing that, to follow the Torah's guidelines, and to live a life in line with the Torah, which means that we're living a life in line with our purpose. Because Torah is the user manual. These are the delegation instructions to us for how we can fulfill the purpose of existence, how we can realize our own individual purposes, how we can realize our collective purpose, and how we can realize the purpose of all existence, of matter, of energy, of time, and of space. Torah wants us to continue working in that direction, to continue living a healthy, meaningful life in line with our purpose, and to continue bringing the world closer and closer to that final objective, to the time when we won't have to continue searching anymore, because we will have found it. You find something in the last place you look, and when you find it, you stop. The ultimate objective, the purpose of everything, is for the world to be completely filled with divinity and godliness. For God to be integrated, not just present, because God's everywhere, but for God to not just be present, but to be integrated into the fabric of the universe and to be integrated into our experiences. That's what Torah wants today. That's what Torah wants next year. It's the same thing that Torah wanted thousands of years ago. In fact, if we look at the very, very beginning of Torah, Torah Shebechsav, the written Torah, which is Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim. It's the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the prophets and the writings, the scriptures. If you look at the very, very, very beginning of it all, Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, the beginning of everything. Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim es haaretz, in the beginning of creation by God of the heavens and the earth. V'haaretz ha'yisosoyu v'avoyu, the world was filled with, the world was void, etc., etc. V'ruach Elokim merachefes al pnei hamayim, the Spirit of God was hovering above the water. That's Genesis 1:2. It's the second verse in all of Torah. One of the things that Spirit of God refers to, what was the Spirit of God that was hovering above the water? It says very clearly in the Midrash, that means the Spirit of Mashiach. Why was the Spirit of Mashiach hanging around thousands of years ago? Surely Mashiach knew that he had a while to go and that he was going to be waiting a while until he was ready to show up, or until we were ready for him to show up. So why was the Spirit of Mashiach hovering above the water before even light was created, before there was light and dark, before there was water, before there was anything? In the beginning of creation, the Spirit of Mashiach was hovering above the water. And it's the same idea. You stop looking when you find the thing you're looking for. But when you start looking, what's on your mind? The thing that you want. You may be 5 hours of searching away or 5 years of searching away until you find it. But because all of the searching is in order to find the object, your objective, the thing that you want, that's the thing that's on your mind. That's the thing that got you out of bed. That's the thing that got you to start looking all those hours or days or months or years ago. That was the thing that was there first. The entire universe exists, time and space exists in order for us to make the world divine. To change the nature of time and of space and of mass and of energy, the nature of the universe and the nature of ourselves. Not by breaking it, not by destroying it, by working with it, by following the guidelines of Torah. Torah doesn't want us to run away from what the world has to offer. That would defeat the purpose. God could have not bothered to create the world. If God bothered to create something, it's here for a reason, or he wouldn't have bothered. If God created technology, the technology is there for a reason. And a lot of technology is very risky and it has costs, etc., etc. But at the same time, that technology can facilitate incredible positive things that were unimaginable just years ago, let alone decades or centuries. There are people today who are completely Torah observant, who live a full Torah life, who grew up and lived in a place where there was no one who could read Hebrew or knew anything about Torah, and then they heard they were Jewish and they Googled it and they landed on Chabad.org, for example, and they started reading every day and they got to the point where they became fully Torah observant. And I know personally individuals to whom this has happened. It's not an exaggeration. This is just one of, we could go on for weeks of the kind of examples of amazing things that technology facilitates. So technology is here, it's here for a reason. Torah wants us to say, this exists. Now there are certain things that Torah says we're not allowed to interact with. But anything that I'm allowed to interact with, it's my responsibility to say, how can I engage with this thing to realize both its purpose and my purpose? How can I engage with this object, with this idea, with this phenomenon in order to make it divine and to make the world more divine? Technology exists. Use it to help people. Use it for charity. Use it for kindness. Use it for Torah. Use it for mitzvahs. The Torah in 2019 wants the same thing it always wanted. It's just that the details have evolved. Torah wanted us then, when it was given on Mount Sinai, to interact with and engage with the world around us in the right way. And when we did that, we brought godliness and divinity into the world and made the world divine, made our bodies divine, made our environments divine, made our homes divine and our families. And Torah today wants the exact same thing word for word. It wants us to engage with and interact with our surroundings and our environments in a way that makes them and ourselves divine. Torah wants the same thing that it always wanted. The nature of the environment's changed, granted, and it's changing by the second, and it will continue to do so. But the objective is the same. Once you finish opening all the drawers, if you haven't found what you're looking for, you go on to the next step. You start taking things off the shelves. You start looking under the beds. You go out to the car and you start looking under the seats. And if you get really desperate, you might start emptying the garbage. Right? And when you finish one thing, you go on to the next one and you keep going and you keep going until you find the thing you're looking for, and then you stop. In terms of that, nothing's changed. We may have moved from the drawers to the shelves. We've moved from the desert to the world that we live in today. We're looking in a different place, in a different environment, and the details have changed, but Torah wants the same thing today that it always wanted, which is for us to live true to ourselves, true to our own purpose, and true to the purpose of existence. And when we do that, we make ourselves divine, we make our bodies divine, our families divine, our homes divine, the world around us divine. And that leads back to Machshava Tchila, the first thought, which was about the objective, which is when the spirit of Mashiach was hovering above the water. Because Mashiach, the realization of a world that's filled with divinity, a world that is divine completely, that's literally all that Torah wants. And it wants us to continue one baby step at a time, moving in that direction. Each of us in our own environment, in the context of our own life. But the guidelines are the same, the directives are the same. The context is different for each of us. But what Torah wants for each of us is the same, and what Torah wanted thousands of years ago is the same. And this is what Torah wants in 2019.